Now let's look at what Aaron Siri responds to this claim that there are 661 studies that demonstrate that all of the vaccines on the childhood schedule have been tested against a placebo.
Mr. Siri, I'd like you to go to your section and talk about the 661 studies that Dr. Scott is talking about in terms of these inert placebo controls. And just describe that in detail. I think it's interesting.
Sure. Actually, I think Dr. Scott has done a great service in terms of pointing out the lack of clinical trials supporting the safety of the routine injected childhood vaccines. You see, he's saying there are 661 inert controlled trials to support the safety of the routine injected childhood vaccines. But when you actually drill down into those 661 trials, let me give you the breakdown of them, okay? 567 of these trials were not a routine injected vaccine for a disease on the CDC's childhood schedule. They were for HIV vaccines or other vaccines. So totally irrelevant to the safety of routine injected childhood vaccines. The remaining 94 studies, 70 of them did not involve healthy children. For example, trials of HIV positive adults. Again, completely irrelevant to the safety of childhood vaccines. Of the remaining 24, 21 did not involve a US licensed vaccine it was not a vaccine used as a control to license a currently used US licensed vaccine. For example, a Chinese flu shots, stuff like that. That leaves us with three studies, that were claimed to have a inert control that were relied upon to license a routine injected childhood vaccine out of this entire list of 661. And these actually help really highlight the problem we have in terms of assessing safety with regards to the licensure of childhood vaccines. I want good clinical trial data. I need it for my practice. Okay, let me walk through those three. One was a trial for the chickenpox vaccine, the varicella vaccine. Now that trial had, it was only a few hundred people, so it was underpowered anyway. But Dr. Scott says it's got an inert control, but actually it was an injection of neomycin, an antibiotic. That's not inert. No. And neomycin used topically can cause issues, let alone injected. The second one was Gardasil 4 trial, which had thousands and thousands of girls and women in the control group. Almost all of them got an aluminum adjuvant injection. And then there were a few hundred, only a few hundred, that were labeled as a inert control, but they weren't. They got everything that's in the vial except for the antigens in the alum, which included L-histidine, sorbate 80, sodium borate, yeast protein, not inert. And then the third one was a Gardasil 9 trial, which finally, by the way, did have a saline injection, just a few hundred. There were thousands and thousands of girls, women in that trial. They all got an injection of aluminum adjuvant, which I don't even know if it's ethical to inject somebody with something that's neuro and cytotoxic. But leaving that aside, the few hundred that got the placebo, but they only got it if they first got 3 doses of Gardasil 4. So again, not an actual inert control group.
All right. Now, this is stunning. So Aaron Siri is very good at what he does, and he whittles away the 661 studies that Dr. Scott presents as evidence.
Our findings directly refute false claims about vaccine testing. We documented 661 trials using inert placebo controls with saline, sterile water, or other biologically inactive substances. Of these, 503 involved antigens that routine childhood vaccines are based on. Most importantly, we confirmed that all 16 antigens routinely recommended for children have been studied in placebo-controlled trials. Every single one. The claim that childhood vaccines haven't been tested against placebos is demonstrably false.
He says, this is what transparency looks like. You can all check them out on the website. You can evaluate them yourself. Aaron Siri goes through and he shows that not a single one of those is a true inert control. Well, actually, no. There is actually one study in the end that has an inert control. Saline, exactly what we all want these things to be tested against. But what does it have? Well, the control group is polluted by having had the vaccine already. So
they're cheating the boundaries of the trial, because the requirement, presumably, that the people in the control, or maybe all of the people in the trial, I don't know, was that they got the 3 shots of the Gardasil 4 in advance. That's not technically part of the trial, and therefore they can claim, Dr. Scott, for instance, can claim that there was an inert placebo, which there was, but only if you confine your boundaries here instead of understanding the larger timeline.
Yeah. So here's the overarching message of that section there, I think. There is no conceivable way that you could get to 661 studies that appear to demonstrate safety via the testing against a placebo control, and not one of them stands up. There is no honest way you could get there. You have to be setting out not to study against a placebo control in order to end up with that level of consistency where if you zoom out, hey, we've got 661 studies that are placebo-controlled. You zoom in, the definition of placebo-controlled doesn't stand up in a single case.
Well,
who knows how many different laboratories?
Let's just be as clear, as precise as possible. Dr. Scott said the claim that childhood vaccines haven't been tested against placebos is demonstrably false. And one of the very surprising things that lawyer Aaron Siri then says is that of those 661 that Dr. Scott is presenting as in full transparency, this is what we do, this is how science is done, 567 of those trials were not about childhood vaccines at all. So it's not that, and because it's not relevant to the question, Aaron Siri doesn't then explain what's going on in those studies, and I haven't gone and looked. But whether or not there are actually inert placebos being used is not the relevant objection there. The relevant objection is the claim was that inert placebos are being used in testing childhood vaccines. Those weren't childhood vaccines, therefore their inclusion in this conversation is in error.
It is irrelevant. And I would point out that it's not only irrelevant in the sense that a bunch of other vaccines were tested against a placebo control. Irrespective, the necessity of a placebo control in order to establish safety is, 10x what it would be for an adult vaccine, because layered on top of the hazards is development. So you'll see why that matters again here in a clip we're going to show. But development is an incredibly sensitive process that we do not understand. We understand elements of it. There are things we can now say, but this is a largely mysterious process. And anytime you are exposing a child or a fetus to a novel compound or novel cocktail of compounds, you are running a risk of disrupting that process. The only way you're not going to know that it's totally safe until people have lived their entire lives downstream as part of an experiment that tracked them for that entire period. But there's no way you're going to know that it is tolerably safe until you test against a truly inert placebo and you just simply say, we injected this cocktail of stuff into this group of children, this other group of children didn't get it, and there is no distinction in their outcomes across any of the large number of things we measured, including all of these chronic diseases. Now, I will point out another thing that was a bombshell presented here is, not in the clip that you saw, is a CDC study that was specifically vaxxed versus unvaxxed children conducted by the Henry Ford Clinic, which is a vaccine favorable entity, and not published because it came out indicative of a tremendous number of chronic conditions that were clearly caused in the vaccine treated group and not in the unvaccinated group. So anyway, that's another thing We will end up covering that story in another episode. But for the moment, go ahead.
I mean, it's a little bit of an aside, but I was reminded of, this has been a journey for us, right? This is not where we expected to end up. And I remember writing about childhood vaccines not being tested against placebo for natural selections, and I went and looked. It's June 27th, 2023, so a bit over 2 years ago. And in it, I say things like, from early in COVID, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I'm a trad-vaxxer. And, I've walked that back now because I still believed many of the things that were being said about the traditional vaccines at that point. But I talk in this piece, and you can show my screen here if you like, about a nation, the Nation, the weekly, very left-wing journalistic magazine, I guess, that's been published nonstop since the late 1800s, wrote a hit piece on Kennedy, and this is again back in the summer of 2023, with an article, cites an article titled "The Vaccine Study You'll Never See." In the piece, I'm just reading from what I wrote here, Dr. Hayes imagines a world in which the safety testing that us crazies are asking for requires that there be a giant cohort of children who not only never receive any vaccinations, but also don't appear to be eligible for other medical interventions and are excluded from the standard of living that so many people attained in the 20th century. Quote, "It's going to be a germ fest because, well, that's just life," says the doctor. And this is relevant here to a number of the things we're going to talk about here, because in part they who are opposed apparently to getting to the bottom of why we are all so sick are trying to win through fear, or trying to scare people into complying with their crazy shots and rules and mandates and everything else. But they are also just like explicitly anti-evolutionary and anti-historical in other senses of the word too, because obviously evolution is an historical science. But the idea that people previous to vaccines were simply dropping like flies all the time is an error. That's just not true. And I think it has been the way that history has been taught to some people, and I think it was to some degree the way that we were taught when we were in elementary school. Think of the engravings of the bubonic plague from the Middle Ages, and people just, dead in the streets. And it's not to say that there haven't been some plagues, but the idea that throughout history, this is what humanity has been like all the time doesn't hold up to any kind of scrutiny. And frankly, all you have to do is look at the rest of the world, the non-human animal world, and see how pandemics are not taking out everyone all the time.
Right. And to the extent that it has ever happened, we do have one profound example in what happened with smallpox when it arrived in the New World.
Yes.
On the other hand, that comes from a world in which populations were not in contact. And so you had a totally naive population encountering a population with a certain amount of smallpox circulating. And yes, it was absolutely devastating to the New World population, but that has already happened.
And before we had an understanding that different pathogens can travel through different routes, that some are vectored by mosquitoes, for instance, some travel through water, some travel through air, and therefore tend to be you can get them by being coughed on. Before that understanding emerged, we were grasping at straws. But it's not that people were always dying from all of the pathogens all the time. What happened in the 20th century was cleaner air, better sanitation, and also better water, and we are healthier. And we've talked about this over and over and over again. I don't have the graph right in front of me here, but what you see is lower rates of both disease and mortality from those diseases before the vaccines show up, over and over and over again. What you have instead is improved sanitation and water and air.
And on top of that, if you look at plague and oddly Spanish flu, you actually have a good degree of confidence that you can get that these things would not repeat themselves on the basis that we have antibiotics. Plague is directly responsive to antibiotics.
Yeah.
And although it seems very strange that flu, a virus, would be responsive, most of the people who died of Spanish flu, it turns out, died of bacterial pneumonia or being poisoned with aspirin, which caused them to drown in their own fluids. So if we look at that story, if we look at the polio story, and I would advise people to go back to Forrest Moretti's DarkHorse episode in which we talk about polio, or his first episode in which we talk about the true polio story, in which, yes, there is a virus, but no, it should not be growing in your spine. What we see is that all of the scary stories that are made to spook us into this worldview in which, well, if you had a large control group of unvaccinated kids, it would be a germ fest. Well, would it? What I think you've done is you've rejected science. You've assumed your conclusion.
Yes.
And in fact, that is the study that we need to have. And what's more, that is the study that we've had and apparently wasn't published because of the doubt it casts on the health improving nature of the childhood vaccine schedule.
Anecdotally, I'm reminded of the first time that it occurred to me that some of these stories from history weren't what they appeared when we were traveling to Madagascar for the first time, I believe. So this would have been in the earlier mid-90s. And we understood before going that there was an outbreak of plague, which seemed terrifying. And obviously you don't travel to a place with an outbreak of plague. And what we were told we had an excellent doctor at the University of Michigan. So I don't remember his name, but he was actually quite excellent.
Yeah, he was.
And he said, well, you're going to be traveling with doxycycline. You're going to have antibiotics with you for, in case of other problems that you will have. And doxy's the treatment for plague. So you've got your treatment. You don't have to worry about plague. Now, that's not to say that there won't be cases where it might not do the trick. I'm not arguing that this is a 100% solution, but it is close enough that thinking back, going well, obviously in the Middle Ages, they didn't have doxycycline, but we do now. And we need to be careful with our antibiotics. We need to be careful not to breed resistance by overusing the antibiotics, which of course is also happening, especially in agriculture. But given that we have these incredible tools, which themselves are not perfectly safe, also true, but which do a fantastic job against some of the things which we have in our memories, in our understanding as these giant, terrors from history. It's oh, well, we have the tool for that. We have that in our arsenal already. Oh, but you people want to have, to test vaccines against placebo. Don't you understand that all the children will die? No, they won't. No, they won't. Why? Who wins by you trying to terrify parents into putting more toxins into their children? Who wins?
I would also point out that an artificial standard has been set for those of us who are awake now to the concerns about unplacebo control vaccines inflicted on children and things like that. We are going to be held responsible for anybody who dies from an infectious disease for which there was a vaccine if they didn't get it.
Right.
That is not the right standard.
Right.
The fact is, there is a question, and it is net. Doc, is my kid net benefited by this shot? Mm-hmm. If we include the risk of the infectious disease for which the shot might successfully protect them and all of the other diseases that they might have caused by the thing, mm-hmm. Net is the only thing we care about as patients. We want to know, am I net better off for taking this? If the answer is no, I don't care what story you've got for me about some infectious disease that I'm probably not going to encounter. I only care about the net impact, and that's the standard.
Well, I mean, as is so often the case, the media narrative wins in part by constantly fuzzing up the borders between the population level analysis and the individual level analysis. That when you're talking about scourges from history, it's about populations. Whole swaths of people died, and that too will happen here in the United States if we don't stay the course and keep doing what we've been doing. But when they're trying to tug at your heartstrings and get you to do the thing that they want you to do, they tell a story about an individual. And they tell you that you're going to make a decision and whatever happens will be on you. And this is an illegitimate form of argument, and it's also an illegitimate form of analysis.
Absolutely. Now, I will say, There are two vaccines which I hold out hope do and did actually successfully work. If no vaccine has ever worked, I'm open to that possibility, but I still believe the smallpox vaccine was effective, even if smallpox was mostly on the wane as a result of other things. And the rabies vaccine, I think, clearly does save people, even post-exposure. So in any case, there are positive examples, but what you want to know is for each injection, not even each vaccine type, for each injection,
Yes.
does this one give me a net benefit? And those are questions that need to be studied.